The day HOA Karen threatened to sue me, the state attorney general was on my porch drinking my burnt coffee and pretending it was fine. Karen did not notice the black Suburban tucked behind my garage, the two aides on the swing, or the woman in the denim jacket leafing through a binder. She noticed my mailbox. She noticed the shade of my front door. She noticed the flag that, according to her tape measure, hung 3 inches wrong. She told me I had until 5 o'clock. I used to think lake life would be quiet. 5 acres at the edge of Birch Hollow taught me better. Karen has been HOA president for 3 years and treats it like a throne won in a war none of us remember. I avoid her the way you avoid a wasp nest. Smile, back away, keep the hose handy. Today I had company. The Attorney General wanted to talk about a public easement the HOA locked with a keypad and a fee chart. I had been sending emails about it for months. Karen did not knock. She pushed past the no soliciting sign and announced, in a voice with serrated edges, that she would be filing a lawsuit by 5. I introduced her to the woman on my porch. Karen shook the AG's hand like it was a defective product to be returned, then squared her shoulders at me and began the recital. Mailbox non-compliant. Porch swing unapproved. Sandbags by the boat ramp violating shoreline aesthetic. I looked at the paper she waved. My name was misspelled twice and the watermark was a clip art pine. The AG asked who drafted the notice. Karen said the HOA legal counsel, with the certainty of a person who believes authority is a tone, not a credential. The AG asked for the bar number. Karen said that was confidential. One of the aides made a note while pretending to study the geraniums. Karen continued with fines and deadlines and an emergency session scheduled for tonight to pass a retroactive rule about shoreline materials. Retroactive is a strong word, the AG said. It is, I added, when money is involved. If you are wondering why the Attorney General was on my porch, the short version is that I keep receipts. Last fall the HOA installed a locked gate across the county easement that hugs the lake. Fishermen used to wheel coolers through there. One morning a laminated sign appeared. Weekend access code $10, holiday weekends $20, board members free. I wrote the county. The county passed it to the state because the path touches water held in trust. A slow machine woke up. I am not heroic. I own a small workshop and a quiet dog and a porch that needs repainting. What I have is patience. Karen mistakes patience for weakness and volume for power. While she threatened to have my utility service tagged, the AG's other aide took photos of the gate and the rate sheet. Most neighbors only want their trash picked up and their kids safe. Karen reads bylaws like a hymnal. When Karen finally paused to breathe, I asked if she wanted water. She said bottled only because she did not trust my tap. The AG said our water utility had an excellent report this quarter and asked which statute Karen planned to cite. Karen squinted at the sky, then said something about navigable waters and national security. The AG nodded as if hearing that gravity was optional on Tuesdays. She asked if Karen would like to walk to the gate. We strolled down the path. At the gate, the AG did not touch a thing. She asked who authorized the installation, where the HOA obtained the right to lock a county easement, and how the fees were set. Karen answered with cheerful vagueness. Minutes existed, somewhere. Votes happened, somehow. The aide asked for a date. Karen said soon. I asked for the name of the law firm. Karen gave a name I recognized from a mailbox flyer years ago. The AG asked again for a bar number. Karen said the number would be provided upon payment of my fines. Back on the porch, the AG finished her coffee and said she would like to return tomorrow with her team to review documents and speak with a few other people. Karen smiled like she had won. No need, she said, because she would be filing by 5. The AG shrugged and stood. Karen lingered to savor her triumph. She told me I would regret making this difficult. She told me the community was tired of my attitude. I told her my dog likes everyone. When she finally left, the neighborhood group chat lit up. A petition appeared calling for action against my flag, my porch swing, and my allegedly aggressive hummingbird feeder. I grilled a burger and ignored it. Around 9, the AG texted a message that made my stomach go cold and calm. The property management company had moved a large payment into a private account with a name I knew too well, a family trust tied to the zoning board. By morning the rumor machine was back in sport mode. Karen posted a photo of herself at a desk with a legal pad and captioned it "Taking Action for Our Community." I spent the morning at my shop waiting for a call. It came just after noon. The AG wanted to meet on my porch again, this time with someone from the state auditor's office. I said bring whoever you like. At 2, they arrived quietly. Karen arrived loudly at 2:15, phone recording, voice pitched for an audience that exists only in her head. She had a printed complaint thick enough to chalk a wheel. She said she was here to serve me. The AG looked at the stack, then at Karen, and asked if service was proper. Karen said it was as proper as it needed to be. The auditor introduced herself and asked for a moment. Karen rolled her eyes and told her to get in line. The auditor did not move. She handed Karen an envelope. The document was not a petition, a notice, or a demand. It was a subpoena, addressed to the HOA and its management company. It requested minutes, contracts, emails, banking records, and correspondence between board members and the zoning board. Karen laughed, a brittle sound. She said anyone can print the word subpoena. The AG said the sheriff would be along shortly to make the request formal. Karen's smile tried to stay and could not. She said I was the one being sued, not the HOA. The auditor asked if the HOA had accepted service. Silence settled in like fog. I said yes. Karen told me this was harassment. The AG said it was oversight. Karen told me this was personal. The AG said it was public. They both looked at me. I looked at the lake, then at the keypad on the gate, then at the phone in Karen's hand. Somewhere behind us a siren murmured along the county road. Karen lifted her complaint like a shield. The AG lifted her eyes past it, and for the first time Karen followed the look. The sheriff rolled up in a dust puff that made the geraniums look like they regretted blooming. He moved with the calm of someone who never needs to shout. A second envelope changed hands, this one for the management company. Karen tried to accept it without paperwork. He waited. Her smile faltered, then she dialed and reached voicemail. He checked a box and said he would attempt again. The Attorney General watched the whole exchange with patient eyebrows. The auditor stood beside her, small and focused, like a scalpel left on a table. Neighbors drifted to the sidewalk pretending to walk dogs that had already been walked. Phones rose like periscope. Lyle, a board member who stores his courage in quiet places, sidled over and asked if we could talk in the shade. He whispered that the minutes from the winter vote to hire the management company had been edited after the fact. He had abstained. The posted version showed yes. He had complained. He was told he misremembered. He handed the auditor a printout of the agenda, draft minutes, and the posted minutes. 3 lines were rearranged so neatly it felt surgical. A white SUV with magnetic logos slid to a stop. The regional director stepped out in heels better suited to carpeting and introduced herself with a smile that carried a ledger behind it. She said there must be a misunderstanding, that all records were available with a proper request. The auditor lifted the subpoena. The director's smile sagged 1 degree. They began to list what they needed. Bids for the gate, invoices, contracts, emails containing easement, fee or code, proof of any member vote, and the insurance binder. While they talked, Karen floated at the edges, recording, narrating, radiating authority the way a space heater radiates warmth onto one leg. The sheriff asked a practical question. Who owned the gate? Karen said the HOA, obviously. The director said the vendor owned it until final payment. The auditor asked whether final payment had been made. The director scrolled on a tablet, then blinked. A wire from reserves had paid the invoice. Reserves cannot be touched without a member vote. The wire went to a holding company with a name made of 2 nouns smashed together. The director looked at Karen as if she had spoken in cursive. Karen said the reserve could be used for urgent protection of community asset. The auditor asked what hazard the keypad addressed. Karen said trespassers. The director read the incident log. It showed 2 reports: a soda can left by the water and a teenager who fished without a license for 8 minutes. Lyle cleared his throat and added that the vendor's owner was the brother of Karen's ex-husband. Karen said the relation was distant and irrelevant. The auditor asked whether that had been disclosed before the vote. Karen said yes. Lyle said no. The AG tapped a finger on the railing and said the 6 o'clock board meeting would proceed, but the state would attend and record. By 5:45 the community center felt like a town fair without food. People arrived in clumps, faces bright with the bravery of numbers. I sat near the back with my dog asleep on my shoe. The AG and the auditor took seats along the wall and managed to look both invisible and enormous. Karen called the meeting to order with a gavel that sounded like a starter pistol. People listened. The agenda was short and slippery. Item 1, fines for obstructing HOA business. Item 2, a vote to ratify prior expenditures. Item 3, discussion of community values. When asked why I had involved the state, I said I like walking by the lake without paying a cover charge. When asked if I respected standards, I said I respect law because it applies even when we are annoyed. Karen delivered a speech about pride and property values. She said outside interference would erode our autonomy. The auditor raised a hand and, with permission, explained that the subpoena required immediate preservation of all digital records. No deletions. A handful of people looked at their laps as if files might be hiding there. Karen attempted to move to fines. The AG stood and said the state had obtained a temporary restraining order that afternoon. The gate would be opened pending review. The sheriff, posted by the door, nodded once. Karen raised fines in the motion to project strength. That was when Lyle, pale but upright, made a motion to remove Karen as president for cause. For a heartbeat the room forgot how to breathe. Priya seconded. Hands rose, more than I expected in a neighborhood that trains itself to avoid eye contact with trouble. The secretary counted aloud. The number was not close. Karen declared the vote invalid. The AG said it would stand pending court review. The board's vice president, a dentist with a matching cardigan, accepted the chair with the expression of a man told he now owns a ship during a storm. Karen sat very still but did not surrender the gavel. We adjourned on a tremor. Outside, twilight painted the lake the color of a bruise, and the keypad blinked like a stubborn star. The sheriff cut the lock with the reluctant ease of a man who does this only when signed orders tell him to. He swung the gate open and stepped aside. A father pulling a wagon walked through without ceremony. The water received them with the kind of silence that makes you believe in adult choices. As neighbors drifted home, the AG and the auditor returned to my porch for 10 quiet minutes. The auditor said the holding company that received the wire shared a bank with the property manager's family trust. Not proof, she said, but a smell. The AG said she would file to freeze accounts connected to HOA reserves until provenance was clear. She also said something else that tilted the floor under my shoes. The zoning board had approved a minor lot adjustment last year that allowed Karen's house to extend a deck 2 feet over the public easement. The approval letter referenced compliance with any gate structure lawfully installed. In other words, the gate violated the permit that kept her deck legal. That was the moment I realized the hill she had chosen to defend was built on a paperwork sinkhole. If the deck extension were voided, she could be ordered to remove it at her own expense and pay civil penalties. Lyle, who had wandered back with a paper cup of coffee, stared at the lake as if it had developed a new shoreline. He asked the AG what would happen next. The AG said Dawn would bring a preservation order to the management office and a surveyor to the deck. She said she preferred calm mornings. I walked to the water with my dog. The gate stood open, uncomplicated. Behind us, porch lights popped on like cautious stars. My phone buzzed with 3 messages from the neighborhood chat and one from a number I did not know. It was the property manager. The message said we need to talk before this gets worse. I pocketed the phone and watched the lake hold its shape. Somewhere out there, a fish jumped, proof that not everything in Birch Hollow trends toward meetings and subpoenas. I thought about the deck, the wire, the vote, the smell of money going where it should not. Then I went home and set coffee for morning. Dawn, it seemed, would be busy. By sunrise, the lake was glass and the air smelled like cedar and damp stone. The sheriff's cruiser idled at the far end of the road, not blocking anything, just existing like punctuation you can't ignore. I sipped coffee on the porch, watching the surveyor unload tripods and stakes from the back of his truck. The Attorney General had said 7 o'clock, and she meant it. The surveyor's assistant carried a clipboard so thick it could double as a cutting board. They didn't knock. They walked straight to Karen's property line. From my porch, I could see her blinds twitch. Her deck jutted out over the slope in a way that looked almost normal unless you knew the original line. The assistant unrolled a long measuring tape, stretching it across the grass. The surveyor hammered a stake and checked an old plat map against a new satellite print. Karen burst out in a robe the color of fresh lipstick, her phone already recording. She demanded to know what was going on. The AG said, a man who seemed born without an adrenaline gland, held up the preservation order and explained it in the kind of voice they use for children's museums. Karen insisted the measurements were wrong, the plat was outdated, the surveyor was biased. She said the county surveyor had approved the deck years ago. The aide pointed to the approval letter that specifically mentioned compliance with lawful gate structures. Karen said the gate was lawful. The aide looked at him and asked for the permit number. Karen said it was in the records. The aide said those records were now frozen. Her voice cracked on the next sentence. The surveyor marked a line that cut straight through her deck support. The first neighbor appeared in a bathrobe holding a mug, then another in jogging gear, then a pair of teenagers on bikes pretending not to watch. By the time the second stake went in, half the street had an opinion. The surveyor worked without commentary, moving from one side of the slope to the other, snapping chalk lines like he was sealing a mystery crime scene. Karen alternated between declaring the process illegal and threatening to call her lawyer. When someone asked who that was, she said it was none of their business, which everyone understood to mean she didn't have one yet. The Attorney General arrived at 8 with the auditor in tow. They walked the deck perimeter, checked the measurements, and compared them to the zoning board's letter. The auditor noted the 2-foot overhang into public easement territory. The AG asked Karen if she had obtained an encroachment permit. Karen said she didn't need one because the HOA owned the easement. The AG asked her to name the statute that transferred county property to the HOA. Karen said the board had voted on it. The AG didn't smile when she said votes don't override state property law. By 9, the crew packed up and left behind a handful of stakes and a very quiet Karen. The AG said a report would go to the zoning board that afternoon recommending revocation of the deck permit. That meant not only tearing back the overhang but also paying penalties for the years it stood there. Karen stood in the middle of her deck like a general surveying a battlefield after the lines have shifted overnight. I left them to it and drove into town. My shop had orders to fill, and there's only so much second-hand drama a man can drink before noon. On the way back, I stopped at the hardware store. Inside, 2 board members, Priya and Lyle, were standing near the paint samples, deep in conversation. They stopped when they saw me, then Priya stepped closer. She said the property manager had sent a group email asking for an emergency vote to hire outside counsel for the HOA. She suspected the money would come from the same reserve account that was under subpoena. Lyle said they were trying to push the vote through before the state froze everything completely. They wanted me at the meeting that evening, not as a member, but as someone who could answer questions about the gate situation without spinning. When I got home, the street felt like it was holding its breath. Karen's SUV was gone. A couple of neighbors lingered by the newly opened gate, chatting in low tones. A boy on a skateboard zipped through like it had always been his route. My dog padded out and lay down on the porch step. Around 3, a black sedan I didn't recognize pulled into Karen's driveway. 2 men in suits got out, carrying slim briefcases. They didn't look like HOA lawyers. They looked like auditors or investigators, the kind of people who take up little space and notice everything. They were inside for less than half an hour. When they left, Karen followed them to the car, talking fast and smiling too much. The emergency meeting started at 6 in the small conference room of the real estate office that manages several neighborhoods around the lake. I arrived early enough to see the property manager setting up a laptop and a speakerphone. About 20 residents filed in, including a few I hadn't seen at the main meeting the day before. Karen swept in 10 minutes late, now in a tailored suit, her phone in hand as if it were a prop in a courtroom drama. She took the seat at the head of the table despite having been removed as president. The vice president cleared his throat and reminded her she no longer chaired the board. She said she was attending as a concerned resident. No one believed that, but no one wanted to be the one to wrestle the chair from her. The property manager launched into a presentation about the urgent need for counsel to protect the HOA from hostile outside interference. She never mentioned the Attorney General by name, but her meaning was as clear as glass. She said legal fees would be drawn from available resources. Priya asked if she meant the reserves. The manager said she couldn't comment on specifics but that the funds were within our control. The auditor, who had slipped in quietly, raised a hand. She reminded the room that any movement of those funds could be subject to seizure if they were tied to ongoing investigations. The property manager's jaw tightened. Karen interjected that this was all a witch hunt started by me because I didn't like following rules. I said nothing. Instead, I handed a copy of the original county easement plat to the vice president, who read the part stating the path was public access maintained by the county. That started murmurs around the room. Priya asked why, if the gate was legal, the county had never been informed. The property manager said she wasn't involved in that decision. Lyle asked if she was involved in paying her own brother's company to install it. She said that was defamatory. The auditor said it was a matter of record. The vote on hiring counsel was called. Hands went up and down in a flurry. The motion failed by a wide margin. Karen stood, declared the board compromised, and walked out. A few residents followed her, most stayed. The vice president announced that all HOA expenditures over $100 would require a majority vote until the investigation ended. That drew cautious applause. Outside, the night air felt cooler than it had in weeks. I was halfway to my truck when the property manager caught up. She said we should talk. She offered to smooth things over if I agreed to stop feeding the state. I asked what she thought I had given them. She said, with too much confidence, that she knew I had nothing solid. I told her sometimes nothing solid can sink a ship if the water keeps pouring in. She didn't answer, just walked away toward her car. The next morning, the zoning board posted a notice on Karen's deck support beam. Hearing scheduled, potential removal of unlawful structure. By noon, photos were circulating in the neighborhood chat. Karen responded with a long post about government overreach and neighbor betrayal. Comments were split between sympathy and irritation. The AG's office sent out a short press statement confirming an active investigation into HOA financial management practices. Local reporters started calling. That night, while I was closing the shop, an unfamiliar number lit up my phone. A low voice said they had information about the management company's finances but didn't want to speak to the state directly. They asked if I could meet at the boat ramp in the morning. I asked why me. They said because I was the only one still standing up to Karen without shouting. Then they hung up. I stood there a long time, wondering whether I was about to get something explosive or just another layer of smoke. Either way, I knew I'd show up. In Birch Hollow, you don't ignore invitations to the next chapter of the fight. The caller was waiting on the low concrete lip by the boat ramp, hood up against the early breeze and eyes that kept checking both directions down the path like guilt had a schedule. She introduced herself as Maya, fast and too quiet, and handed me a beat-up notebook thick with receipts and handwritten arrows. The notebook had the tired feel of something that had been hidden under sweaters. She worked for the management company, junior staff, the one who balanced the end-of-month reconciliations and got told she misunderstood things when the math did not obey. She said she could not talk to the state because her boss was her aunt and Thanksgiving did not need new material. I told her we could take a walk. We sat on the damp boards of the public dock, with our shoes hanging above water that smelled like pennies and algae. Maya flipped to a page that had 3 columns: date, amount, memo. Every fourth line had the same memo in a slightly different costume: gate maintenance, shoreline beautification, access monitoring. The amounts were too round. The receiving account names sounded like small companies you only meet on business cards: Cedar Compass LLC, Heritage Lake Trust, Birch Harbor Partners. She traced a line from an HOA check to a reserve transfer to a wire that ended in a trust connected to the zoning chair's family. She said her boss called them pass-throughs to simplify tax reporting. I said I prefer taxes that are complicated enough to be honest. She pulled a thumb drive from her pocket with the caution of someone passing a live insect. On it, she said, were PDFs of invoices from a vendor with a P.O. box and a phone number that rang to a voice mailbox that always sounded like it had just woken up. The signatures looked copied between documents, the timestamp metadata identical across different months. She had also saved screenshots from the HOA voting software. Proxy authorizations coming from the same IP address in a 2-hour block on a Sunday morning, all approving the gate budget retroactively. The IP provider was our mutual friend, the ISP I actually pay on time. The billing address matched Karen's house. I asked why she was doing this. Maya said she liked walking by the water as a kid, and she wanted to keep liking that even after she paid off her car. She thought if it all came out at once, she could say she was the one who made it stop. She did not say the word whistleblower, but it sat between us like a guest you invite to dinner, and then pretend you do not know. I called the Attorney General from the dock bench. She answered on the second ring and told us to stay by the water. 10 minutes later the denim jacket appeared at the top of the path, somehow both casual and official. We moved to my porch where the AG and the auditor unrolled a legal pad and started drawing lines between names that shared more letters than chance would like. The auditor photographed the notebook, the receipts, the lines with the tidy handwriting. Maya explained how the vote software allowed admins to resend links to members who said they had lost them, and how an admin could technically fill a ballot if the member never clicked. She said she had asked about IP logs because she needed to reconcile a participation report. The reply came back in the tone used for interns and young cousins. The AG listened without interrupting, then asked one question: whether Maya would make a statement under oath. Maya looked into her coffee as if advice lived there and said yes, but her aunt needed to hear it from someone else first. We had 2 choices: walk everything in today and let the state move, or watch one more day to see whether the pressure invited a bigger mistake. The AG leaned toward patience. She said a pattern needs lines, not dots. The auditor suggested that if funds moved again while the freeze orders were pending service, that could support a charge that uses the word racketeering too easily in headlines but slowly in court. I am not above a little spectacle when the cause is clean. I said we could survive one more day if it meant the story landed without wobble. Maya said the property manager had called for a volunteer cleanup at the lakeside that afternoon with a cash donation box for a landscaping fund, and she had heard the developer's project manager would drop by. By noon the volunteer day looked like a scene from a brochure written by anxiety. There were rakes and plastic gloves and 4 teenagers who had negotiated the shortest assignment. The gate, now permanently open pending court review, framed the path like a reminder of how ordinary access can be until someone decides to tax it. Karen arrived dressed for a ribbon cutting that existed only in her mind, hair sprayed into a helmet and smile so wide you could count inventory. She made a short speech about pride in shared spaces and community spirit, avoiding the word investigation like it was a puddle that might splash. A knee-high box with a slit on top sat near the folding table with bottled water and stale donut. The sign on the box said Beautification Fund. Maya stood on the fringe, small and steady. I raked leaves off the path with the quiet aggression of a person who has decided not to speak in public for a few hours. Around one, a man I had not seen before wandered up carrying a rolled tube tied with elastic. He wore the uniform of trying not to be noticed. Neutral polo, sunglasses, hat with a sports logo no one in this county ever wears. He chatted briefly with the property manager, who like any person under pressure had developed a tell in the way she pinched the bridge of her nose. He handed her the tube. She slid it into a tote. The Attorney General, on the trail pretending to ask the sheriff about fishing, drifted closer on an invisible current called practice. The man left the box with a thick envelope while complimenting the view in a voice that had range for closing costs. He turned to go. The sheriff, who had quietly moved from pretending to fish to pretending to check a park map, stepped into his path, identified himself, and asked the man for his name. The man gave a name that was not the one on his business registration. The sheriff, who is polite even as he ruins your plan, asked again and received the right one. The AG stepped in and asked whether he had business before the HOA. He said no. Maya, pale now but brave, said the envelope looked like the bundles of cashier's checks the management office pulled for vendor prepayment. The property manager laughed too hard and said cash donations happen to every nonprofit. The auditor asked for receipts for donors. The property manager said it was informal, just neighbors helping neighbors. The AG asked whether she was a 501c anything. The property manager did not enjoy that question. It would have been enough if it had ended there with awkwardness. It did not. The sheriff asked the man in the polo what was in the tube. He said flyers. The sheriff asked if he could take a look. The man hesitated, then opened it. Inside were laminated pages printed with the county seal and the words temporary access restriction for improvements, with dates left blank and a signature that, if you had only seen it in a hurry, looked like the zoning chairs. The font was wrong. The seal had a tiny error where an eagle's wing tipped into nothing. The auditor's eyebrows did the kind of math you can see from a distance. The AG asked where he had obtained them. He said they were mock-ups for a future permit and he was only bringing samples to discuss someday later perhaps. The sheriff held out a hand. The man did not argue. Some days are not good for arguing. By late afternoon the volunteers had learned more about public administration than they had planned. The envelope held cashier's checks made out to an entity called Lakefront Legacy Coalition, created 2 weeks ago at a mailbox store. The registered agent was a paralegal at the developer's law firm. The donation box contained bills folded in a hurry and one envelope with a memo line that read Board Outreach. The AG photographed everything, then told the property manager she was now a person of interest. Karen smiled at nothing and told anyone within earshot that the state had nothing but theatric. She said she was filing a federal claim in the morning to protect property rights against state abuse. She said the words constitutional crisis like she had practiced them in a mirror. I went back to the shop to return the rakes I had borrowed. The light slanted through the front windows and laid a slow gold across the floor. I was counting extension cords when the bell over the door chimed. 2 men in button-downs walked in with the posture of people rehearsing seriousness. They handed me a notice from a lawyer in the city. It said a petition had been filed that morning to create a special improvement district along the lake for shoreline upgrades, enforceable by assessments and liens. Attached was a list of signatures from property owners authorizing the formation. My name was on it with a zoomed-in image of a signature that looked almost like mine if you squinted and wanted to be done with this. The notice explained that the new district could levy fees without regard to HOA boundaries. It also listed a hearing date set for the following Tuesday at 9, a time chosen specifically to be difficult for working people. The men asked for confirmation of receipt and left. I stood behind my counter and read it again. The district's map covered my lot and 6 others that had been loud in the group chat. The improvement plan included a new access gate with enhanced enforcement options and a landscaped berm to discourage loitering. In other words, some version of the same gate with nicer shrubs and more legal teeth. I called the AG on speaker. She listened without interrupting, then asked me to read the statute citations on the notice. She said the petition was a maneuver people try when a private association begins to melt. They create a quasi-public body and push the same agenda wearing a new badge. It does not work when the signatures are sloppy. The thing about escalation is you can feel it in your ribcage. The AG arrived with the auditor in tow. Maya came too, drawn by gravity she had chosen. We compared the signature page to a copy of my mortgage document. The forged loop on the S clung to the wrong side like guilt on a coat sleeve. The auditor pointed to a run of names submitted through the same notary stamp at the exact same minute. The AG stepped onto the porch and called someone. When she came back in, her voice carried the weight of a plan that had been waiting for a hinge moment. She said the state needed one of 2 things to turn this into a case that could be carried by more than outrage. They needed a recorded solicitation to move money that should not move, or a confession that the proxies and signatures were fabricated. She asked whether I was willing to meet the property manager if she reached out again and let a small microphone do the heavy lifting. I am not a hero, but calm has its uses. I thought about the gate blinking like a metronome. I thought about Maya's notebook, the wrong wing on the eagle, the cashier's checks inside a volunteer day. I told the AG I would meet wherever she wanted, say as little as possible, and let greed be the talker. The auditor slid a tiny device across the table that looked like a key fob. She explained where the mic lived and where truth hides when it thinks no one will notice. The AG said they would be nearby, that they do not send civilians into something they cannot scramble. In the dimming light, my porch felt like a stage between 2 kinds of law, the written one and the one we play at when we think no one's watching. My phone buzzed. It was the property manager. Her message said she wanted to make this all go away tonight and asked if we could talk somewhere private. I picked the diner at the edge of the county line because it had parking on 3 sides and more security cameras than a bank. The property manager texted back that she preferred somewhere off the radar. I told her I liked pie. She didn't argue, which was the first time in months she'd agreed to anything I suggested. I got there 10 minutes early, ordered coffee, and let the mic fob sit on the table like it was just my keys. The Attorney General's SUV was parked half a block away, angled to see the front door. The sheriff's cruiser loitered across the road under the excuse of checking the speed trap stats on his laptop. When she walked in, she had the restless energy of someone who just read their own name in the wrong part of an email chain. She didn't sit right away. She scanned the room, made eye contact with the waitress, and finally slid into the booth across from me. Her tote bag hit the seat with a weight you could feel in the springs. She ordered tea, no lemon, then leaned forward like we were about to discuss family secret. "This has gone too far," she started, in the same tone people use when the problem is that the fire alarm won't shut up, not that the building's on fire. She said Karen had overplayed her hand, that the Attorney General was sniffing in places that didn't need attention, that good people were going to get hurt if this kept escalating. I let her talk. My role wasn't to feed her lines, just to give her enough quiet for her own voice to hang itself. She told me she could make my fines disappear. Yes, the same fines the state had already frozen, if I'd help calm things down. I asked how I could possibly do that. She said I should tell the AG that I'd misunderstood the vote records, that the proxies were legitimate, and that any inconsistencies were just clerical. She said if the state thought I was backing off, they'd lose interest. I told her the state wasn't here because of me, they were here because of money that didn't land where it should. She smiled like she'd been waiting for that cue. "You mean the reserve transfers?" she asked, lowering her voice. "Those are flexible. Sometimes you have to move funds to keep them safe from creditors or tax grabs. Everyone does it. She took a sip of tea. If you've been told otherwise, you've been listening to people who've never had to manage a large budget under pressure. I asked about Cedar Compass, Heritage Lake, and Birch Harbor. She didn't flinch. Pass-throughs, she said. Completely above board if you know how to document them. And when this is over, those accounts go dormant. No harm done. She didn't notice the way my thumb rested lightly on the fob. Then she leaned in further, her perfume cutting through the smell of fry grease. Look, the deck thing with Karen? That's nothing. She'll pay her penalties and rebuild if she has to. But if the state gets into the improvement district paperwork, she trailed off and glanced at the tote bag. We'll all have bigger problems. That's why I need your help before Tuesday's hearing. I let the silence stretch. She reached into the tote and pulled out a folder thick with papers. She slid it across the table. Inside were unsigned signature sheets, half-completed petitions, and several completed, ones that had obvious cut-and-paste jobs where signatures had been lifted from other documents. The notary stamps were all from the same day. She told me these were the originals before final prep, and that once they were cleaned up, they'd be impossible to challenge. I asked her why she was showing me this. She said because she thought I was smart enough to understand that everyone wins if these go through. The improvement district, she explained, would have power to bypass the HOA entirely and levy fees as public infrastructure upgrades, which would then be subcontracted, at healthy rates, to companies owned by trusted partners. The HOA would still get its cut, the developer would get its projects approved faster, and she and Karen would have secured their positions for years. And you, she added, wouldn't have to deal with these constant fights anymore. You'd have peace. Peace is one of those words that sounds generous until you hear the conditions attached. I nodded slowly, just enough to keep her talking. She leaned back, satisfied she'd read me right, and said, "We can even backdate your proxy vote so you're officially on the record supporting it. That way, no matter what happens, you're covered." The waitress came by with a refill, giving me a quick glance like she could sense the air in the booth had weight. When she left, the property manager's tone shifted, sharper, more urgent. She said the AG was going to make an example out of someone, and if it wasn't me, it'd be her. She said she'd rather have me as a friend in the room than a stranger outside it. That was when the AG walked in. No jacket this time, just a blouse and a stack of manila envelopes in her hand. She didn't even look at me. She went straight to the property manager and set the envelopes on the table. "You've been served," she said, calm as a cloudy day. Inside were subpoenas for her personal bank records, communications with the developer, and all correspondence relating to the improvement district. The property manager's eyes flicked to the tote, then back to the AG. "We'll need that too," the AG added. The property manager protested, of course, said it was an ambush, that she was meeting me as a private citizen, that this was harassment. The AG pointed at the tote and told her it was now potential evidence. The sheriff appeared in the doorway as if conjured, took the tote and gave her a receipt. She sat frozen, hands flat on the formica, looking smaller than she had a moment before. They left together, the sheriff carrying the tote and the AG walking behind her with the even stride of someone who knows the next few days will be busy but fruitful. I stayed in the booth, staring at the folder she'd left behind. The waitress picked it up and slid it toward me. "You want a box for that?" she asked. I smiled and said no. That night, the neighborhood group chat went from garden gossip to wildfire. Word of the subpoenas spread faster than the photos of the gate coming down. Karen posted a shaky video in which she claimed the state was staging a coup against property owners. She vowed to resist unlawful seizures, and hinted at federal allies. The comments were split between applause emojis and eye rolls. The next morning, the zoning board's hearing on her deck was rescheduled, moved up to Friday, 2 business days sooner than expected. The AG called me before lunch to say the Improvement District petition had been formally challenged on the grounds of forged signatures. The hearing would still happen, but it would be under a different lens now, one that included the state auditor sitting in the front row. Friday came, and the boardroom was full. Karen sat at the table in a bright jacket, shuffling papers like they could form a shield. The property manager wasn't there. She'd been advised not to attend public meetings during the investigation. The AG, the auditor, and the sheriff took seats along the wall, all business. Maya slipped in quietly and sat near me, her hands folded tight in her lap. The board chair opened with the surveyor's report. The deck extended 24 inches into public easement and violated the terms of its own approval. Karen tried to argue that the HOA's ownership of the easement nullified the violation. The chair asked her to produce the statute. She couldn't. Then the AG's aide read from the Improvement District petition, pointing out the same names in the same handwriting across multiple sheets. Gasps from the audience punctuated the reading. By the end of the hearing, the board voted unanimously to revoke the deck permit and refer the petition to the county prosecutor. Karen stood, declared the decision illegitimate, and stormed out. Cameras from a local news crew followed her into the parking lot, catching every word of her rant about tyranny. The following week was a blur. The open gate stayed open. The county put up a new sign explaining it was public access, and always had been. The HOA's bank accounts were frozen pending review, and a temporary board was appointed to handle only essential maintenance. The Improvement District proposal was withdrawn voluntarily before the prosecutor could act. The property manager resigned. Her resignation letter cited irreconcilable differences in vision, but didn't mention the boxes of documents now sitting in the AG's office. Maya got a new job in town, far from HOA politics. Lyle started showing up to meetings with a binder and a smile that suggested he liked being underestimated. Karen still lives on the lake, though the deck is shorter now, its cut edge a quiet reminder that some lines don't move no matter how loudly you push. She avoids me in the grocery store, but every now and then I catch her glancing at the shoreline. The gate blinks open in the sun, and people walk through without thinking about it, which is exactly how it should be. On my porch, coffee in hand, I watch the water and think about how much noise it takes to get to something this quiet. The AG had been right. Patience isn't just waiting. It's keeping the door open long enough for the truth to walk in on its own. And in Birch Hollow, truth has a way of finding the porch eventually, whether Karen likes it or not.